Hi everyone, I'm Gary, and if you know me, you know that I'm always on the lookout for cool modules and adventures to bring to the tabletop. But what if I told you that there's a fantastic, untouched resource right at our fingertips? Stick around and I'll show you how to use video game role-playing guides as tabletop adventures. So today we're going to look at something really different and really cool. I'm really excited to do this video. We're going to look at printed gaming guides for video role-playing games, and I've got a couple here. And we're going to talk about how you can use these guides, which are written for video games, as guides to the player. How you can use them as a really accessible catalogue of adventures, and how I've done this for like many years, and how you should definitely do this as well. Now, let me preface this. I really enjoy video games, but I'm like ultra picky about the kind of video games I play. I don't play I don't consider myself kind of like a video gamer playing like everything that comes out. There's maybe one or maybe half a game a year that I find interesting. One game every 2 years or so that I like really enjoy. But having said that, there is one series that has kind of captured my heart since I was in short trousers, and that is the Elder Scrolls. And the Elder Scrolls, I started playing these games in 2005 at the very tail end of kind of Morrowind's lifespan, which is the third game in that series. And then I started playing Oblivion, and then obviously, I don't need to kind of introduce Skyrim when that came out in 2011. Now, for those of you that don't know, just so you're aware, the Elder Scrolls games, there's 5 main games in the series. They are all first-person adventure games, role-playing games, in which you start out as a prisoner at the beginning of them all, and through kind of like the actions that are beyond your control, you are released and you are set off to kind of wander around the fantasy world where you can do all sorts of things. You can be a wizard, a thief, a ranger, a warrior, whatever you want. And emphasis is placed on character progression, customization, and immersion and exploration. So they're really good kind of games to talk about if we're talking about video games in relation to role-playing games. Now, so what am I actually kind of talking about today, and what are gaming guides? Well, these are game guides. For those of you who, on my younger end of the demographic, of my audience, might not be aware that before the internet, before kind of like fan wikis, companies would put out these huge tomes for their games. They still actually do it now, but they're much kind of like smaller print runs than they used to be. And in these guides, there would be everything that you need to know about the game. They're kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like a cheat, really, where they'd explain how to level up, how to do certain encounters, what are the outcomes of certain speech choices if you have different ways of interacting with things in the world. They would lay out every kind of like last secret, and they're really useful and interesting. And they are basically what fan wikis have kind of become. Now, with the advent of the internet, they're kind of almost obsolete. Almost, though, not entirely. And they still exist now, but for collectors. And my thesis is that you can use these guides as catalogs for catalogs for random adventures for your own tables. So let's just take a look at them and talk about some adventures that you could use from these guides to bring to the tabletop, whether you're playing D&D or My Game Journeyman Expert Master or RuneQuest or whatever. Let's have a look at some of these guides then, and we'll talk about, as we do, why they're good and why they're useful as resources for game masters as a catalogue of adventures. And what we'll do is we'll do them in chronological order. So this is the guidebook for Morrowind, and it was for both PC and the original Xbox. It doesn't say who the publisher was on it, but let's have a look through. Now, all of these books do this rather frustrating thing at the beginning. I mean, it makes sense to do it. It's just not you. It's only frustrating for us as game masters. But basically, it lays out all the statistics for everything in the game, and in terms of all the mechanics and how the beastry for the game works, how the kind of like the damage for the different weapons, leveling up, all that kind of stuff. But we don't need any. I mean, this is quite cool. Alchemy ingredients and all this list of alchemical ingredients. That might be quite useful, and at least food for kind of like inspiration. Now, and even the beastry actually might be useful for that reason. One thing that this book does that I find a little bit annoying is that all the maps for it are at the start of the book. They're chapter 3, the world, and then we just have pages and pages and pages of maps. And I don't think this is particularly helpful. I don't even think it's particularly helpful, even if you were going to use this for its intended purpose as a game guide. So I'm not really sure why they did it. What we're most interested in is the quest section, which is further back in the book. Now, it's towards the second half, and you can see by the binding on the side, it tells you what sort of quests we're looking at. So there's a description here of the main quest, chapter 4, the main quest, chapter 5, faction quests, which goes through each of the different guilds and the different houses of the Morrowind setting and how you can interact with them. But what's more useful, I think, in each of these books is a chapter much further on, which is the miscellaneous quests, because miscellaneous quests, by their very virtue, are going to be able to be kind of useful in a variety of different contexts. Now, it's worth saying that this book is ugly. It's not particularly nice to look at whatsoever. It's not in colour. I think that not that much thought has been given to the formatting. Even if you were to use this as a game guide for playing Morrowind, I don't think it's that helpful. Most of the images, which are all in black and white, are just pictures of NPCs to try and help you try and find who you should be talking to in the game. But one thing that it does get really nice is that each of these subheadings is a different quest. So you get this whole kind of like description of what should happen in this quest in this section. And that can be useful. So if you just had kind of like a cup of tea or something, you're going to sit down, read a couple of quests, and you're like, oh, is there anything that's inspiring here? There is that. But that's what Morrowind is useful for. And obviously, the setting of Morrowind is the most interesting thing that remains about that game. It's not necessarily the quest line, which is fine, but it's actually the setting, which you can't really convey in a setting guide. Now, let's have a look at Oblivion. Now, Oblivion holds a very special place in my heart. Literally, not just the game, but this book in particular. I think this was the first ever game guide I actually bought, and I've had it. It's one of my most treasured possessions. It written by Prima Games, and what happened by this time is that we'd moved into an era where these kind of game guides were sort of becoming sort of collector's items, as well as kind of like what they're intended for as game guides. So it's laid out exactly the same way, but it's much more beautiful to look at. So it's coloured paper. All the images are in colour. And again, this does exactly the same thing where it lays out the game's mechanics at the beginning, which we don't need as a game master. We're not interested in these things. There may be some things of value and interest, such as the bestiary. And for example, this list of spells might be quite useful to look at. If you were looking for ways to, reasons for inspiration, that might be quite helpful. But what this game guide does do a bit better than the other one is we start with the quests pretty quickly. And again, the type of quest is put down the side, and we get the maps integrated into the sections where we need them. So again, we've got lots of pictures of NPCs to kind of determine what we're looking at, to help get a budding player figure out what they're supposed to be looking at. But we also get these images of particular scenes, and then we get maps of different areas. Now, maps are not going to be that helpful to you as a game master, not because they're not helpful or they're badly kind of rendered. It's just that this is a video game, and the way some of the maps are set up, they're just kind of one long kind of tube of enemies that the player just has to grind their way through, and that's not particularly helpful. What we are interested in, though, is the text itself. And as with Morrowind, what is particularly useful about this one is we have obviously the main quest, and then we have the faction quests. Usefully, this one tells us what the faction quests are. But more interestingly, as ever, we are going to be looking at the miscellaneous quests. And the miscellaneous quests are laid out thus. Now, I like the fact that it's in two columns, but what I want to draw everyone's attention to is the fact that each of these blue kind of headings is the quest. So this quest here, the Siren's Deception, which I have actually used for what we are discussing, is just these two kind of like two columns here. They're not even the full columns. And that's a really cool quest. I've used this in my games before in a campaign of Old School Essentials when I had to pull something out very, very quickly. And what it is, it's a group of women who seduce kind of the player character, or attempt to, and then get them to this house outside of town and then rob them. And they can work out, based on what else is there, who else in town has also kind of like fallen for these seductresses kind of like charms. It's a really, really good kind of short quest. But I like the fact that you have everything that you need in just these 2 short columns. Again, you can pick this one up from either the rumour mill or directly from Milona, whom you'll find strolling through town and whose husband Gorgon is said to be intimately involved. A gang of women has been luring Anvil's men to a remote place, seducing them and robbing them. When they robbed Gorgon, they stole a ring that has been in Melona's family for generations. She'll give you 100 gold pieces to get it back. I mean, that immediately conveys what I need to know as a game master, and there's lots of this. Another really cool example is this one, the Forlorn Watchman. This is about a ghost whose body has not been laid to rest properly. His body is in a shipwreck, and it's a short kind of undead dungeon. This formed the inspiration. It's the primary inspiration for my own module, the Dirge of the Forlorn Piscator, which is a bit more involved than this quest, but involves a very kind of similar backstory. But just really, really useful and kind of cool, interesting stuff. I mean, laying out the map through a kind of puzzle room, that's not in any way unhelpful for us as a game master. And the miscellaneous quests are set up by their locations, basically, in each town. So you go through each of the towns and have a look at each of these. But that's Oblivion. Now, let's have a look at Skyrim. Now, by the time we get to Skyrim, wikis are a thing, very much so. They're very kind of ingrained in the kind of like the gaming experience. But I do think that while I think there's perhaps a tendency now for these gaming guides to be more a collector's item than actually kind of truly useful, I don't think Skyrim suffers from that. I think that Bethesda or whoever kind of put the guide together, I think it's Prima again, but I don't think they're credited. I think they understood that people actually did want this because of how impressive their previous entries into this kind of like series have been. And again, it starts with this breakdown of all these different kind of mechanics for Skyrim and how that works. And this book dedicates a little bit more to that. For example, like this character management and leveling advice. All that stuff is useful if you play the game, but it's not useful to us as game masters. So again, it's labeled down the side, and these actually come to the bottom. So this is quests, and also more specifically, it tells us on the left-hand page which kind of part of a particular faction quest or the main quest this is from. And what I really like about this, so again, it's in full color. It's organized even more clearly than the Oblivion one. And I actually think the Oblivion one is my favorite just because the quests in it are probably, I think, the most engaging. But it is organized in a way that you could literally just sit down, like I said, and just read a couple of these and be like, okay, I'm going to run that. I'm going to kind of take that as an adventure. I like the idea that in each of the guild quests, it lays out all of the NPCs at the beginning, so you have a little bit of a sense of who each of these characters are. I think that is really, really, really good fun. And if we just turn again to the miscellaneous quests, which I think here are just named side quests, we always want to kind of have a look at what's going on, but they're really, really similar. It tells you how many spoilers there are in each of the guides. I mean, you're reading a guide, right? It's basically a cheat book. I don't understand why you'd be so bothered about spoilers. But I do like the idea that it also lays out a couple of different endings, because by the time we get to Skyrim in 2011, a couple of different, quests, technology has moved forward that quests can have multiple different endings quite easily. And this goes through every single possible eventuality. So that's each of the game guides. And let's just talk about some examples. So having had a look at them, let's just have a think about some adventures that we could use for examples. So I'm going to go through these in kind of like reverse order, starting with Skyrim, which is the most recent game, and then go back to Morrowind. Now, the first one is the Golden Claw from Skyrim, and anyone who's played this game will be familiar with this quest. And it's a really good adventure for you that you could use to bring to the tabletop. And this is the rundown of that adventure. The character comes across Lucan Valerius, who is a trader in the town of Riverwood. And in there, he talks about when you first go in, he's having an argument with his sister about this. They have been burgled, and an object of significance that has been taken is this golden claw. And it's an artifact from kind of like the era of dragons. And it's been taken to a nearby barrow. Now, I love barrows. I've talked about there's so many videos where I talk about barrows, but I love barrows, and I love a barrow dungeon. It's been taken to this barrow by these bandits. We don't know why, and you're just sent off to find it. So what makes it cool? Well, that's a really good hook, right? A fetch quest is always a really, really cool thing, but a fetch quest that takes you to an interesting location is even better. So you cross this bridge and head up into these foothills, and suddenly you are hit with this kind of cyclopean landscape. You have a few skirmishes with bandits that are hiding in the ruins, these, part of this bandit group. You go into the Barrow, and the Barrow is this wonderful mixture of encounters and enemy types. So while I said maps are not going to be that useful, I think sometimes we can take something from these. And actually, I do really like the way that this dungeon is laid out in terms of its level design. I mean, just everything about Skyrim is considered. Even that very first road that you walk down when you get out of Helgen, just before you get to Riverwood, the hairpin bend on the road is designed so that when you come around that corner, you definitely see those kind of standing stones and go and investigate them. So you go to this barrow, defeat these bandits, and then enter the barrow itself. And you fight a series of bandits in the upper levels. And I like the idea that it gets more dangerous as you go deeper. You fight a couple of kind of vermin enemies, Skiva, which are like giant rats, basically. And then eventually what happens is you come to this enormous chamber with a giant spider, which is just cool. And you fight this giant spider, and this spider has strung up one of the bandits, the bandit that is actually carrying the burglar that has stolen this golden claw. So you cut him down, he betrays you instantly and tries to run off. And you can let him run off, or you can chase him down. But whatever happens, you're going to have to go and get to his body because he's got that claw. Now, what immediately happens after this is that you are faced by Draugr, your Haugbig, these mound-dwelling undead monsters, which are set out in sarcophagi niches for the rest of the dungeon. And you get this golden claw off him after kind of like a set of puzzles, which are always good fun. And they're really straightforward puzzles, but they're useful from a ludic perspective because they make the player feel smart, and you do feel smart when you work something out. Now, you eventually kill this bandit, you fight your way through these undead monsters, and you come to this puzzle door. And you have to work out that on this claw, there's these 3 symbols, and they correspond to these symbols on the door. So it's another really cool puzzle. Again, it's simple, it's straightforward, but it is engaging. And you open it and you enter this kind of inner sanctum. And here you face this undead Draugr Lord, and you're given this kind of power called the Shout, your first kind of like words of a shout. It's really cool. That would be a really good example of the kind of things you could just drop straight into your world. And it would be much easier if you had a copy of this book. It would be far easier to do it because you've got the details then. The second module, the second adventure I'd like to look at is A Brush with Death from Oblivion. And this is one of my favorite miscellaneous quests. I think Oblivion, for reasons that are not worth explaining in the kind of scope of this video, I think Oblivion has the best quest writing out of these 3. I don't necessarily think it's the best one, but I do think it has the best quest writing. And in this miscellaneous adventure, A Brush with Death, Raif Lythandus, who is a dark elf painter, he's gone missing. He's gone into his workshop and he's never come out. And his wife has used the spare key to open it up. And she's like, I don't know where he's gone. And what happens is, you go into his workshop, you agree to go and have a look for him. Going into his workshop, you can find a series of paintings, and you find one painting that you can interact with. And in doing so, you are instantly teleported, like transported into the painting where Raif is trapped. And it's great. It's just, what is cool about this adventure is just how creative it is and how kind of like different it is and how willing the developers were to be different. And I think you get a lot out of this. And what Raif explains to the player is this, that he has a brush that was passed to him by his father, and this brush allows him to, it's a magic paintbrush that allows him to paint from within the painting in order to replicate things at true scale and paint with kind of like living detail. But what happened was a wood elf burglar entered his house, attacked him, and when he woke up, he was in the painting and the brush was gone, so he can't paint an exit, he can't get out of the painting, and basically, this wood elf ran off into the painting with this brush, and what he's done to protect himself, to stop Raif from coming after him, is he's painted a series of trolls. It's like, okay, so this is, and in terms of level design, it's nowhere near as interesting as the first example I talked about. It's just a series of kind of like clearings where there's these trolls that you got to fight. But what's cool is that, one, that these trolls are painted trolls, and 2, Raif says to protect yourself, take this to help you. And he gives you 6 bottles of turpentine, paint stripper. And I love that because then you can use this as like a poison that you spread on your weapon, which then when you hit these trolls, they die like instantly. They die really, really quickly. And I loved the idea. It's such a minor thing to name poisons, name a poison like turpentine and use that as a kind of mechanic within the game. I think this is something that would be really cool to play through in a kind of old school kind of style. So what happens is you fight your way through these trolls, and it turns out that they've actually turned on the person who painted them, and they've killed this guy. You get the paintbrush, you go back to Wraith, he thanks you, and together he paints an exit to this realm, and you leave together and are rewarded. So that's another really cool adventure that you can just take out of these books and use. And then lastly, take a look at Morrowind. There's only a minor thing I want to say about Morrowind. Morrowind has a beautifully zany, like kind of crazy setting, and that's what's the most engaging by it. The story is also engaging, but there's actually one particular moment I want to talk about, and that is a quest called A Falling Wizard. It doesn't actually have a name because it's a kind of freeform quest that doesn't appear in the log. But as the player leaves the starting village of Sedanine, this nearly always happens, right? You hear this scream, and then looking up, you can see a wizard fall from the sky, and then you can search him, right? He dies, and it's this wizard called Tahiel. And what's really cool about this is that he's got these like Icarian potions. They're like a reference to Icarus, and they allow you to jump like ungodly high, right? They let you like jump over a mountain, which is really cool, but also just like one of those interesting things that you can kind of come across early in the game. And that is a really cool, interesting quest hook, because what the question becomes, if that happens to the players, they suddenly start to ask themselves, if they can work out, oh, we drink these potions, then I jump like a mile into the air. Where is this guy jumped from? And why? What was he, attempting to do here? So that's really cool. Now, what are my final thoughts on this? Well, every single module that you could use from one of these books is going to need work. It's a kind of halfway house between just like a list of quest seeds that you might get in a kind of setting guide and a good kind of fully playable module. But it is closer to being a playable module than it is to kind of just being a quest seed. And because of the nature in which it's written, because it's meant to be terse and clear for the player who is reading these to use them, to help them with their kind of playthrough of these games, it does mean that they're like really clear and minimal. All of them are minimalist in a way that it only adds to the clarity. You could easily use other guides. I've just used the Elder Scrolls as an example because I'm a huge fan of those games. But I have a guide for the original Dragon Age Origins, and that is laid out just as beautifully as the Oblivion guide and as the Skyrim guide. You could definitely use something like that. So there are many different guides to these different games that you could use. But I do think it is just kind of worth saying that while these objects, these books, are largely collector's items now, we can really get something out of them. And I promise you, if you are sat there and you're thinking, I've never played these games, or maybe you have played them, but if you've never played them and you're never going to play them, and video games are not for you and they're not interesting, you will still find something of value in having a look through these books. You'll still find it inspiring and engaging. I'm 100% sure of that. And I wouldn't kind of say that unless I really meant it. Now, that's my thoughts on using game guides, for tabletop role-playing adventures. I really hope you enjoyed this. Below you'll find links to my own games and modules. I'll be back next week. But until then, like, subscribe, comment, tell me what you think of all that, as this as an idea. But otherwise, I'm Gary, and I'll speak with you again soon. Thank you.